Hi, good evening. I can hear myself. It's 6:10. I'll get us in this evening to begin the meeting. We'll start with the housekeeping. Roll call. As I call your names, please raise your hand and say that you're here or present. You keep going. Dakota Boulette.
I'm here.
Josh first.
I am here. Thank you.
Welcome. Tom. Berto.
I am here.
Ann Fifield.
I'm here.
Kirti Hasija Kaufman. And Alicia is running late as well. Michelle Shu.
She's there. She's online.
Welcome. Gordon Lafer is not with us yet.
He's online.
Okay. Thank you. Judy Newman. Yeah. Laurel O'Rourke. Yeah, okay. Myra Rabasa. Welcome. Eric Richardson.
Here.
Okay. And Erica Thiessen.
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, Erica. Great. Thank you. Welcome. We have quorum. First item on our agenda this evening is action to approve the meeting minutes from the April 17th, 2020 budget meeting. Hopefully you've all had a chance to review those. Do we have a motion on those? Yeah, Josh.
I just have one correction. On the list of who was present on April 17, Chief Administrative Officer Colina Beard's first name is missing an L, I believe. I think it should be 2 L's if I'm not mistaken, at least what I've seen elsewhere. Although if she's there, she could probably answer for herself, but I can't see on my screen.
That someone actually reads
I will apologize to my fellow member. My dad was a newspaper copy editor for many years, so I grew up with craziness like that.
No apology needed, man. I think attention is very important. Josh, do you want to keep on speaking about emotion? Maybe?
Yeah, why don't I guess in that case, I'll just make a motion that with that one change, with the extra L added, we approve the minutes of April 17th.
I second.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Do you have any discussion further on that? Any other spelling corrections or other items for correction? Let's see, anybody clamoring for corrections here? All right. All those in favor of the motion with that one correction there, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same none. We'll pass those minutes unanimously. Unanimously. So thank you for all getting through that. Next item on the agenda is review responses that we had from last meeting, and thank you, Matt, in advance for having provided those to us between then and now. So Matt, if you'll walk through those topics and take questions as we go through, I appreciate it. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, feel free to ask any questions as we go through. The document is in the agenda or in the packet for you. First questions revolved around some ESSER funding questions and the bid for the eWeb building. The second, we're actually number 3 on the form, it should be number 2. But number 3 was a correction to a budget that was budget mistake that was found by Ann on our budget committee. So that was corrected, and the numbers there, appropriations didn't change, just some of the categories were listed incorrectly. We had a question about special education funds decreasing. Hopefully we've provided some additional information for that. And then we also provided a video link to the budget roadshow that was done at all the middle schools, and a couple key slides that we'll actually see in tonight's presentation when we go through that. We had a question about class sizes that was on there, that was provided from our audit. That goes back to 2013 on just licensed staffing ratios. And another follow-up question regarding the e-web purchase. The next question was revolving around some additional information on free food costs. That was actually provided from our audit document and goes back to 2013. So provided some pre-COVID numbers for the committee to get some additional information on those. And I provided some additional information regarding the request for 30 EAs or potential funding. So lay out a few different options and scenarios there for you to review. And then our last question was just about supply spending in our schools, and gave you some additional information that we do have funds available still. And if you are hearing those rumors from staff or students or anything, to please tell them to reach out to us, because we have money available to buy supplies. And it's just a matter of getting that communicated so we know who to talk to.
I had just a couple questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, Matt, feel free to field questions.
Yeah, Gene.
Okay. One of the questions was on the first thing under the ESSERS, where it says $2 million is held as potential staffing increases geared. I know we've always done that. I thought that also comes out, I mean, we have done that. So do we not take it out of general fund anymore and it's been moved over to ESSERS?
No, this was additional dollars in ESSER that was set aside for that staffing. So in addition to what is commonly referred to as the superintendent's contingency fund, when staffing comes up and he has available money to bring on certain aspirationals or corrections to the system that we need to bring in folks. And I probably did say that as eloquently as he would.
So we won't have to completely backfill, we still take.
Correct, and we still have that contingency money in the general fund this next year. We just also budgeted in ESSER just as another precaution.
No, thank you, that answers. And I have one other question, which was, under when you were describing under 9, your scenarios for the 30 EAs.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you, I should have that on. Thank you for the cue. I think under maps, some of the affinity leaders, and so those are, you just gave examples of who was under maps.
I kind of gave a broad spectrum to give you an idea that MAPS is not just directors, and there are a lot of lower level positions within MAPS that most people may not realize are in there. So I wanted to give a broad spectrum of, when you say, oh, we're just going to cut it from MAPS members, well, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to chop off the top level of staffing.
Right.
It may impact other needs, and there are lots of MAPS members that are even paid less than classified staff, depending on where you are on the scale.
No, that was good, I just wondered, because we had added quite a few affinity leaders and equity people and regions and schools, so they're in maps right now. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just a quick question, follow up on the 22.9 FTE with ESSER funding. Just wondering how you can address this, or Superintendent Dye. Are all those going to be going away with ESSER, or do you imagine rolling some of those into other funds?
Unless Dr. Dye wants to answer, but it's kind of a mix of positions that we anticipate rolling into the general fund, and then some positions that are term limited. So it's a mixture.
And maybe when you cover later in the slides aside, you're going to cover the FTE levels from previous years.
We will cover that, similar to what the budget roadshow showed in
Right.
some of the history. We'll go through those slides and talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, great, thank you.
I have a question. So I don't know the name of the category, but there's classified license maps, and there's also a much smaller category from the superintendent to the maps. These are people that are directors and assistant superintendents and so forth. I would like to know how many are in that group.
There are,
And but
let's see if I recall that. 52, 53,
you don't have to tell me right now.
135, 140-ish. kind of based on looking at that number 9 and adding up the categories. 52 members that are principals and assistant principals, 43 members that are IT construction related.
No, I guess I didn't make that clear.
Okay.
So these are people that are not in MAPS, but they actually are the supervisors of most of the people in MAPS. I think it's a superintendent, there's his assistant superintendents,
So we have a very small handful, I would say.
that's what I mean.
2 assistant superintendents.
It's just
We
like,
can get you the information.
Yeah.
okay, so I figured it was just a handful, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just wondering, is it 5, is it 6, or?
I have a question about item 10, the supply spending. What I understand that you've shared with us here is in regards, when you say this fiscal year, you mean the one that's wrapping up.
Correct.
So do you know, or maybe this is a superintendent Guy question, are we intending to cover the cost of supplies next year? And is that something that families can be counting on and know ahead of time?
I'd wanna know what you refer to as supplies. Like, we will have the required school supplies available for students at each school. But some things that have been provided in the past, like backpacks or clothes, that's not something that we would take out of the general fund. Something that we work with community partners to provide as needed.
So I'm just thinking of the lifespan of my kids and of my kids as students, to clarify. And during earlier years, I would get like, buy these Crayola crayons and this number of Ticonderoga pencils, and last year, and I believe the year before, none of that was all covered by the school. So it went beyond like construction paper and the things that schools have always provided, to include the like thing that you went to Target and they had the list for you. And that's, I'm asking more about those and less about backpacks and new shoes.
Yeah, for the coming academic year, we have funds updated from general fund or ESSER dollars that can cover those costs for schools.
Okay.
There'd be a question about whether we wanted to make the decision to do that in perpetuity moving forward.
Okay, that's great, but at least 2023, 2024, families won't be getting those lists and doing that shopping individually.
They may be doing that, but we will be providing a list of, all the supplies that a student would need to start the school year in the fall. We can make funds available so that they don't have to purchase those individually. Some folks like a particular Ticonderoga color or size, so they might go out and buy it on their own, but I don't think that's what you're talking about.
No, I don't mean the doing it just because they like to do it. I mean receiving the notice from the school that your kid must have items 1 through 10 and going and buying them.
We'll be taking care of that.
Great, thank you.
I'm sorry, Josh, I see you have your hand raised.
Thanks, Gary. I was going to follow up on Maya's question, if I may. And I think my memory is failing for, well, probably 3 reasons. One is I'm middle-aged. One is the pandemic. And one is my kids are now 2 in high school and one's already graduated from 4J. So help me a little bit here to understand. I kind of recall that elementary level it got covered for. Am I anywhere close to right? A few years ago, even before the pandemic, like I think there was a movement, at least maybe it wasn't my kid's elementary school, which was Adams, where it seemed like elementary was covered, but maybe not middle or high school. At that point, we were ATA and North, so I don't know if that made a difference. But I guess where I'm coming from is I'm just trying to get a sense of, we can't do everything. And of course, if money's not going to be there, in perpetuity because it was pandemic money, is there anything in the budget that would at least prioritize like younger kids or lower or primary as opposed to secondary education, or maybe my memory is completely faulty. I don't know, but probably a question for the superintendent is my guess. Thanks.
Prior to the pandemic, we made efforts to reduce at all of the secondary schools fees for some classes like electives or technology fees, things like that. Any number of them had crept into back to school packets over the course of many, many years. And so we will continue to ensure that there are no fees associated with core content classes or any class if possible, and provide back to school supplies, a budget for that at each school, starting with elementary and then seeing what finances allow as we move up.
Great, perfect answer. Thank you so much. I appreciate your help with trying to get me to remember as well. Thank you again.
Any other questions from the committee?
Thank you again, Matt. Appreciate it. Next up on the agenda, we have items raised by the audience. The Budget Committee sets aside time in each Budget Committee meeting to hear public comment. Committee members can sign up to speak to the Budget Committee by submitting their request online at www.4j.lane.edu/board/budget-committee or contact the superintendent's office at 541-790-7707. The deadline to do so is by noon on Monday before each meeting. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes and cannot give their time to another speaker. A timekeeper will show a sign when the speaker has 30 seconds left. And when their time is up, speakers may offer objective comments or criticism about district operations and programs. For complaints about individuals, the district has a board policy and complaint process. And they can also contact the superintendent's office again at 541-790-7707 for more information about submitting a formal complaint. Tonight, I don't believe we have any public comment, but feel free to reach out in the future if you would like to make public comment. So thank you for that. Next, we'll hear from Superintendent Dye. Superintendent Dye, you have the floor.
Thank you. Evening, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge that today is the first day of Teacher Appreciation Week. While we are tremendously grateful for the more than 1,000 educators, school nurses, and other licensed professionals every day, this week affords us the opportunity to slow down and acknowledge the differences they make in the lives of our community's children on a daily basis. I encourage each of us to take the opportunity to personally express our gratitude to an educator who has made a difference in our lives or the lives of our loved ones. In support of their efforts, we now turn our focus to allocating resources in support of their work. Tonight, we'll look at the details of our general fund allocations. As you'll recall from previous discussions, 87 cents of every dollar is spent on staffing in this district through salaries and benefits, including PERS contributions. Additionally, we'll discuss our current spending, staffing, and projected fiscal outlook, along with our anticipated ending fund balance. What you'll see is a larger ending fund balance than typically recommended. However, I will encourage this committee to be cognizant of several outstanding factors as they seek to appropriately ensure fiscal stability and sustainability for years to come. First, any reinvestment through district reserves is a one-time investment, meaning that this money would not be responsibly spent on staff positions as it would not continue to be available into the future. Secondly, in the coming year, we will be asking our community to reauthorize a local option levy that will provide the resource to sustain our current operations. As the success of this tax measure is still unknown, prematurely allocating resources that may be needed to sustain us in the absence of community approval is prudent. Finally, Eugene is a community with a very deep history for collaborative decision-making. Reinvesting without broad community involvement would be inconsistent with our community values. What I recommend is that this committee continue with the fiscally conservative approach for the upcoming year to allow the levy and engagement process to occur. This allows us to responsibly and thoughtfully reinvest in accordance with our community's wishes and our district goals. Thank you again for your commitment to our district, and I look forward to the discussions this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it. Next up on the agenda is items for information. First item is Budget Committee presentation from Matt Brown again. Matt, you have the floor again.
All right, thank you very much. So for those of you on Zoom, please don't hesitate to just shout if you have a question or something, because I may not be able to see you on the screen as the presentation is shown. And those of you in person, please don't hesitate to shout out your questions as well or interrupt me. Nothing new for me, so. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So today's agenda is covering our general fund, and then at the end of the presentation, if we get there as a committee, you have the opportunity to approve the appropriations and the tax levy at the end of the year. So on slide 3, we're going to look at our general overview of our general fund revenues. And if you recall, I gave you kind of a best scenario kind of sneak peek at our last meeting. And we've had a couple changes since then, all in good reasoning. Our beginning fund balance from our last meeting is rather higher than what was originally anticipated at our last meeting. So you can see on the pie chart there, it's roughly going to be about 24% of our general fund revenues at $72 million. And then obviously our main revenue source is the state school fund, still budgeted at the $9.9 billion that we received from the state, and property taxes at just under 30%. And just to note that that local option levy as well is about 8% of our general fund revenues, so roughly $23 million. The next slide is a review of our general fund resources by categories, so our local sources, intermediate, state, and federal sources, and then our beginning fund balance. So you'll note that the budget for fiscal year 23, the current year that we're in, we estimate that our total resources were about $270 million. And when we completed our third quarter estimate, or year-end estimate, we're now estimating that those total resources will be about $283 million, which is roughly about $13 million more than we originally budgeted. So this mainly comes from the beginning fund balance. You can see the increase there jumping from 52.8 to 67.6. And then we have a little bit of a shortfall in our resources, not much, about $1.8 million. So that beginning fund balance growth, along with some anticipated expenditures that are not going to reach our original budget numbers, produces a $72.4 million beginning fund balance for next fiscal year, which, as you can see from our previous years, is a little bit higher and continues to kind of grow.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Judy. So the increase, is it unfilled positions mostly that we have that, or what causes the increase?
A lot of it is unfunded positions and materials and services that just aren't expensed.
Okay, thank you, then.
And you'll see that a little bit more in detail in the next slide when we talk about expenditures. And in that case, let's go to the next slide here that talks about expenditures. So I've broken our expenditures out into several categories. Salaries and associated payroll costs are obviously the biggest expenses within our general fund. As Dr. Dye mentioned, about 88 cents of every dollar that we spend in our general fund is related to personnel. So you can see the fiscal year 23 current budget in the middle, $116 million for salaries and $74 million for associated payroll costs. We are anticipating that at the end of the year, we will end at about $110 and $70 million. And then you can see the remaining categories that most of them will all fall a little bit under what was originally budgeted. Overall, the total operations, about $15 million spent less than what was budgeted. So this obviously adds to our beginning fund balance in the next year. That's why we have a $72 million beginning fund balance in the next year. Our budget for next year showcases the salaries and associated payroll costs at the $129 and $80 million. A large portion of that is due to the classified bargaining contract agreement. So initially, when we did the budget for fiscal year 23, that union contract was not included into the budget. So that 116 and 74, we went back and did some calculations, or let's say Bob did some calculations, to kind of figure out how much would it be in this current fiscal year if we had it budgeted. And it was about 19 or so million. So the 129 and 180, and then the materials and services that are shown below. You'll see a larger transfer that we are budgeting for next fiscal year, that 13.9 million, that's explained in further detail in the next slide. You'll also see that a higher contingency in unappropriated amounts from the previous years. So whereas the board policy currently right now is a 5% reserve policy, we are anticipating that the board and superintendent will have a discussion about what the appropriate level of reserves will be for the district. In anticipation of that, we have already increased our reserves to the 10% of unappropriated and 5% contingency. So just as a reminder, contingency funds are appropriated to be used. So if needed, the superintendent board can make a resolution to move those up into one of the categories above to spend. However, the unappropriated amounts cannot be spent unless there is a declaration of emergency.
This is Josh. Can I ask a quick question on that one? Because I think this is really important because we keep hearing, or we're hearing for quite a while now about, the recession is coming, or maybe it's not coming, or now it is, and the Fed's doing this and banks are failing, but there's not going to be a recession. I mean, and we have to be fiscally responsible. And of course, it's the board at the end of the day that has to make the final decision on this. And like you just said, that unless there's a declaration of emergency, something like that, you can't go unappropriated. Forgive me if this is already out there, has been answered already. Currently, you said currently the board is 5%, but that there is planned discussion about moving it to 10%, or there has been discussion about moving it to 10%. Forgive my ignorance, I just don't know.
No, you're fine. There is a planned future discussion. That was one of the topics that was brought up as I started working here in September. It was brought up when I met the board and their anticipation of, hey, we want to have a discussion. What do you think about this? And so definitely plan for the future in the next fiscal year to talk about that reserve policy, along with all the other financial policies to review and just update.
Got it. And this may be a question more for Maya as board chair. Maya, you are board chair currently, right? Yeah, okay. But those types of discussions and all that's all part of typical board process, public meetings, retreats, things like that, right? I mean, I'm just thinking if public wants to weigh in, or if those of us in the budget committee or who have been so involved in it, obviously won't have a part of that because our role will end either today or soon. But if we want to, as just individuals, come back and kind of see what's going on with that, or kind of make our opinion known, there'll be a process for that, I gather.
Yeah, that would absolutely take place in a public meeting. So they would have the steps involved if we were to come to a decision. The discussion would have to take place there, but the decision would absolutely, so it would be noticed, and as a board, we could decide if we wanted to hold a separate session to talk about it more, or if we felt it would suffice to offer the community the opportunity to make comment during our meeting. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. I really appreciate the clarification and Maya, your leadership. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
A couple questions about purchase services and supplies and materials. The number for the, thank you. All right, on purchase services and supplies and materials, proposed FY24 is substantial. It's quite a bit larger than what we spent in 22. And then on the next three items, capital outlay, other objects, and other uses, which are much smaller numbers, but they're really variable over time. And I suspect that we only go back to 21, so like the normal times aren't on this table.
Correct.
Okay, so does that explain it?
That is a little bit because of during COVID, we haven't been able to do a whole lot, so that's why you see those 2 years as a little bit lower.
Lower numbers, okay. Okay.
I imagine some of that is also the fact that we have limited funds that are maybe going away that we need to spend into the next.
Correct, and there are some general fund expenditures that we have used ESSER on. So one thing that comes to mind is like electricity costs. Those are expenses that we have paid for with ARPA funds. So that shows a savings in our general fund expenditures. So that's a little bit less, adds to our beginning balance rolling into the next year. Okay, moving on to the next slide. This one's a little bit more of a detail of the $13.9 million in transfers that we are budgeting for next fiscal year. The first transfer you'll see is the $10 million to deferred maintenance. We've had some discussions in previous meetings over our capital expenditures and the longer list of deferred maintenance projects that we have throughout the district. And so with a larger than anticipated fund balance, we thought it would be prudent for now to set that money aside specifically for some of those deferred maintenance projects that maybe should be done sooner rather than later. So we are budgeting that $10 million to the deferred maintenance fund of 490. We have the $2.3 million that is budgeted to go to nutrition services. And then the curriculum and risk management reserves, these are typically yearly transfers that have been done in the past. Through the COVID years, they were taken out of the budget just to help save money. So we are now putting those back in. And then the 250 for FICA reserves, that is a bargaining requirement, I think, for
No, it's for all three of the groups. It's basically like a savings that we get by employees deferring part of their income through their tax shelter liabilities. It lowers the cost of the district, and we transfer that back to the reserves.
If I may, Matt, does the $2.3 million to nutrition services, does that cover the universal school meals? Free
yes,
school meals?
that's the cost for the general fund to cover the free school meals.
Terrific.
And then we have the contingency not appropriated, the unappropriated at 10%, and then the contingency was broken out specifically. In the past, the district had set aside $9 million for PERS reserves, just for rate increases that may happen to help supplement that, and then just a general $5.8 million in contingency to make up that remaining 5%. Any questions? Hearing none or seeing none. I'll roll to the next slide, which kind of gets started into our staffing discussions. So you'll see this was part of a couple of slides here were from our budget roadshow. We thought it would be nice to kind of go through these with you to show you what we've been showing everybody else. So in 2018-19, it's our best kind of data that we can pull almost through COVID there, and then 22-23 to where we're kind of getting out of COVID. And so you can see the groups broken out by licensed, classified, and MAPS members. About 1,800 employees back in 18-19, and now about almost 2,200 employees. So an increase of about 347 employees, or FTEs, I should say, in total. So please keep in mind that when we say FTE, a classified person, one FTE could be 4 people. So you can see the FTE changes by group there on the far right, the 149, 167, and 31 members. And the next slide is probably equally important to show, and that shows the actual breakdown of how those groups are throughout those previous fiscal years. So back in 18-19, the licensed members took up roughly 50% of our staffing within the district, and so on and so forth with classified and MAPS. Fast forward to 22-23, you can see that roughly those percentages are about the same. So 49%, 43%, and 7%. So it's, go ahead, Gary.
Oh, just go back to the previous slide on that.
Yeah.
So I guess my wondering is what the budget that we're looking at tonight to pass, what the FTE is broken down by that budget.
So I did not include the 23-24 budget numbers, mainly because this data that you're looking at here was pulled for especially the time frame around September, October when school starts. A lot can change between July or even today to when September happens, and as far as that staffing. So I didn't want to put a number in 23-24 when knowing that it's going to change by the time we get to when school starts with staffing and all the rollovers of everything happening at the district. So those 23-24 numbers are not included here. We do anticipate a small increase in overall staffing, but I don't have a breakdown right now of what those numbers are specifically for licensed, classified, and MAPS.
It's just generally it looks similar-ish.
Generally, it's about the same, a little bit more than the previous year.
Thank you.
We would, excuse me, want to keep from the slide that shows the FTE proportions, want to keep very close to that as we have been in the past. We won't feel comfortable seeing, for example, MAPS ballooning to 13% of our staff. Don't know that that's necessary and probably wouldn't be incredibly popular with others maybe.
And I think another good note too is for people to understand, if you were to go back and look at the expenditure slide that we have for those fiscal years and see what we budgeted versus where we're at, just because of the amount of vacancies, keep in mind that when we're budgeting this next fiscal year, we're including all those vacancies in those positions. So what we actually see may be less than what is budgeted. So I was a little prudent in not giving you specific number data there because I know it's going to change. Any questions on some of the staffing sheets? Okay, we'll roll forward to another slide. This is a new slide that we wanted to show you. It shows those staffing levels going back to 2014 in the green, blue, and orange bars there. But then it also overlays our enrollment numbers and what the projection is looking into the future over the next 4 or 5 years. So the enrollment numbers are not new. That was part of our budget roadshow. And you can see that based on our research and planning folks, that we do anticipate lower enrollment over the next few years. And you can see the dilemma we come into when we have increasing staff numbers pretty steadily and a pretty sharp decline in our enrollment. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we're heading into the future and what changes we may have to make.
I just had a question about, are we seeing in those numbers more part-time staff coming in as opposed to those being like full on FTE?
I don't know that I have the data to give you a full answer on part-time versus full-time. I'm not sure if Dr. Dye has any recollection of part-time versus full-time staffing.
I wouldn't be able to provide a comparison, but it's a good question. We can get you that information.
This is Josh, if I may ask a question, Gary, or?
Yeah, go right ahead, Josh.
Thanks, yeah. So I, with what, you just said, well, not you, Gary, you know, I guess I'm looking at this chart and I'm kind of in my mind, not really looking at the last couple of years because things are just so crazy with COVID, right? But I just want to get a couple of things clear. We're a budget committee for just 1 year, right? I mean, we are looking at this next year's budget, but of course we want to keep an eye, and obviously the board has to on kind of the years out, you know, the out years, I guess we call it. So I guess one question I have is, are we recovered enough from COVID to be able to have a good enough speculation on where enrollment will go in the next few years? Like here, it does look like it's kind of going down, but you know, why, I guess is one question I have. And I know in the past, we've had presentations about in-migration into the district and where people can afford housing and that kind of thing. So I guess that's my first, well, that's a question to start with. Like, how do we, where does the or not speculation, what's the right word I'm looking for, expectation come from?
I think I can help Josh and then Matt, you weigh in. We are seeing across the state a pretty significant decrease in public school enrollment between 25 and 30,000 students across the state. We are not in 4J hit as significantly as other large districts on the I-5 corridor. For example, I want to say Beaverton was down about 1,500 students, whereas we started the year down about 350. I think folks finding success in online school and wanting to continue there is a factor. And there was a point in time in 2021, early 2022, where the cost of rental property in Eugene was on par with that in Portland. And so people found it more difficult to afford housing here. I think there's a constellation of factors that impact declines in enrollment. We don't anticipate this being dramatically wrong and instead seeing a big increase in overall enrollment. There's also a drop in the birth rate here about 5-6 years ago, which results in fewer and fewer kindergarten age students coming into the system.
Yeah, I remember hearing Oscar talking about demographics on that too. I forgot to mention that. One quick follow-up from or is there a thought that if let's say this is accurate, and we're seeing that with COVID, you know, maybe people are more doing online or homeschooling or things like that. Are there other employment opportunities that open up for 4J to have employees perhaps doing different things that they're doing now? I guess what I'm thinking is we look at what, delivering educational services means, if we have students who are, I mean, if they're homeschooled or if they're online schooled and we're not, as 4J being that provider of services, we don't get funding for that, correct?
If they're in an online program with us, we do, but if they
Yes,
go
okay.
to an online charter school, that's correct, we do not.
Okay. I guess I'm trying to think, like when people, like at a supermarket, I try not to use the self, checkout, because I feel like it takes jobs away. And then people argue to me, well, no, but people who have to design the computers or the programs or fix those, or the staffer who is there. And so I'm just hopeful that even with the numbers lower, if I guess it wouldn't help with homeschooling, but at least for the online school, if the Eugene, our online academy, maybe there'll be some opportunities for continued employment. If not as high a level, but at least we'll find people to help with doing different things. But again, I'm a layperson. You know this much better than I do, Andy. Thank you.
So I'm wondering, so where, do these projections come from the state? Did they do, like Portland State do that, or did we do our own
These
projections?
projections are done by our research and planning folks here in the
Okay.
district.
Because, I mean, I think what's really relevant, so I hear that statewide, it's going down, but how are we doing relative to it? Because I worry about our piece of the pie from the general fund, and if we are sort of on par, then
Right, so in essence, for those that to explain your question more for the state school fund, if our drop in enrollment is on par with other districts, we still get the same percentage of the pie. Versus if we drop exponentially lower than other schools like Beaverton or Hillsborough or other districts like that, then we end up losing more from our state school funds. Right now, I would say, as Dr. Dye mentioned, we're better off
Okay.
than some of our school districts.
And so we're gonna, yeah, that's important.
Yes. Any other questions or comments on this slide? Okay. We'll keep moving forward. So the next 4 slides are just some scenarios for the budget committee to be aware of. And these are forecast models based on next year's budgets and some assumptions that we make on staffing, purchase services, material services. And this first model shows that what happens if the district does not pass the local option levy. And
Let's
what
move on from that. I don't
It's good for the committee to at least be aware of what the impact is on our district, because nothing is guaranteed.
And for the public to be.
Correct, yes, for the public to be aware. So this scenario looks at not passing the local option levy and us essentially putting our head in the sand and we're gonna continue as is and we're just gonna trudge forward. So you can see in the slide there, we have basically until fiscal year 26 under this scenario to where things really must make a change if we don't make anything before that. I'll move on to the next slide. This next slide assumes a similar scenario that we're gonna put our head in the sand with our staffing and we're gonna continue as is, status quo, but we do pass a local option levy. And this goes back to our enrollment numbers and our staffing numbers continuously to increase and the assumptions that we put in for PERS, insurance, salary costs, those types of things. And so with the local option levy, doing nothing and remaining status quo at all of our current service levels, we show that roughly it pushes it out to the following year in fiscal year 27, when we estimate that our ending fund balance will be negative of about $7 million. Any questions or comments on those first 2 scenarios? Okay. I'm going to move ahead to the next 2 scenarios. And this is meant to spur any discussion that the committee may have. But this next 2 scenarios were based on the ideal that what would happen if the district lives within its means? So the resources that we bring in the general fund, those are what we expense, meaning we're not overusing any fund balance, we are spending exactly what we get in. So under this first scenario is living within our means and not passing the local option levy. Based on our estimates and trajectories of our assumptions, in fiscal year 25, we would have to cut expenses in the realm of around $31 million to remain within our means. Over the next few years, another big chunk of $26 million in fiscal year 26, and then 4 million cuts for the couple years after to remain where our revenues and our expenses match. The next slide shows you living within our means with the local option levy. You'll notice that living within our means with a local option levy means that in fiscal year 25, the district would have to cut roughly about $25 million. In fiscal year 26, another 12, and then in fiscal year 27, another $6 million. So what I'm showcasing you here are scenarios kind of at both levels of extremes, where I anticipate the district will be somewhere in the middle. So whereas we try and do our best to forecast out 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, this is really a year after year situation that you have to look at and plan for in the future and not make long-term commitments. Any questions or comments on those scenarios or anything that the committee would like to talk about? Judy?
I appreciate seeing it this way. I think that's what I was anticipating seeing. And just making sure I really understand this. Under the one with the levy, let's take that one. Cumulatively, we would be cutting $43 million. So that it accumulates, right?
Yes.
And the big cut in the first fiscal year is really, that's when we don't have ESSER's money for the first time. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
And that $25 million doesn't, I don't want the scenario to be pictured as $25 million in cuts and that's all going to be staffing. These are cuts across the entire board of the expenditure line. So you're looking at transfers, materials and services, purchase and services, capital outlay, and material and personnel and benefits. So it's a combination of everything. So it's not intended to say that we're going to cut $25 million in staffing in fiscal year 25. Now, obviously, you know, a majority of our funding does cover staffing, but that doesn't mean the full $25 million has to be all staffing. So I do actually, if you could, with that in mind of $25 million, Lisa, could you go back to slide 5, which is showing the expenditures? And this will help hopefully emphasize what I said earlier about going year to year and really looking at these things. In fiscal year 23, this current year, we budgeted $116 million in salaries and $74 million in associated payroll costs. We are only anticipating to spend 110 and 70. So right there is $6 million and $4 million. So there's $10, $11 million right there that just by keeping our current staffing and putting a hiring freeze in for this year, if that is one of the scenarios, that could help solve that $25 million and cut that down to 15. So those are types of scenarios and options and opportunities that we can look at throughout this next fiscal year to make sure that the board and superintendent have options to review and discuss. Any questions on those scenarios?
Question, so that $6 million of savings you just pointed out, that just means that, thank you. I like to forget this. The $6 million you pointed out in savings for this fiscal year, just due to lack of ability to fill positions, buy stuff, that goes into next year's beginning fund balance.
Correct.
So we should be $6 million richer this year. So if you had been able to hire all those folks, would this $25 million in FY25 be $31 million?
Yes. If we were able to fill every single position at the beginning of the year and realize their full cost of employment, potentially that is the scenario that would play out.
So it's better than it could be.
It is better than it can be. You're kind of a half glass full.
Yeah.
I think it's really nice to have seen the larger percentage of the unappropriated funds for to help, you know, fill for that rainy day fund a bit. So thank you for that vision.
Eugene School District is by far in a better off position than many other school districts around the state. And so if we can leverage those fund balances to help weather the next few years, that means that there won't have to be those large layoffs that districts we've seen have already started.
I'm just gonna piggyback on what Judy said under her breath, which was, thank you, previous board. Just wanna keep that in mind for the budget committee. I mean, I know in my 16 years, we had to make drastic cuts. Dr. Dye was talking about, like you said, you were reading past board packets or minutes or something where we, in one board meeting, closed 4 schools. So I think the previous board really saw that. I know they did, I know I did, and said, let's get off this roller coaster. It's not fair to staff. Once you get a pink slip, I believe most people, I'm not saying all people, most people are a little less loyal to their employer. And they're a little more frightened about buying, spending, or staying. So I just really encourage us to take that look out, not just next year, but the year after and the year after, to have this budget committee and next budget committees take a look at that. Make sure you have the reserves. We had a lot of reserves too, because we couldn't fill positions, because of COVID, because of the federal money we received. But as if you go out, it's also because of our reserves and the choices the previous boards made, which were tough choices, very tough choices, because you are making a choice to level out that roller coaster, at the same time cutting programs that would be very helpful, or not cutting, but not funding programs that of course would be very helpful to schools and teachers and students. Just want to point that out. Thanks.
I have another question. And so there is, what's our contingency there? We have, what, 44 million? This 25 million assumes that the 44 million is not filling this 25 million hole. It's remained as a contingency at this, in this scenario. Okay.
This is Josh. I just want to kind of piggyback on what Alicia said. And I come from a special place because one of the schools that previous board closed was my kid's school. So, which is how I started getting involved with all this and got to know people and learn how the process works and learn that it's not my kid, it's all the kids that we have to look at, which I kind of knew already, but I've been very fortunate to serve in this role for quite a while now in the budget committee. And one frustration, I guess, based on what Alicia said is, you know, we are here just for a year. I mean, we as a budget committee, we look year to year, and that's fine. I mean, that's, you know, we as a budget committee don't vote for more than just the next fiscal year. But obviously the board is the one that has to keep an eye on it. So again, I don't envy my colleagues on this committee who are obviously board members, but I think that you know, it's hard when you hear something like don't make long-term commitments, because you know, education is a long-term commitment. You have we are going to educate kids K to 12. We have new buildings going up. I know it's different funds that come, you know, build buildings, but the hope is these new buildings will not exist for just a year, but, you know, for longer. Obviously, we have contracts with or CBAs that of course are inherently long-term commitments, because they're not just for a year, if they're for 2, 4, 6 years, etc. And I will add, and not to beat a horse again, but I would add that I think there's been a moral movement among this committee in the last year or two about free lunch. And again, we can't vote on that today for as a long-term commitment. We can only vote for next year, but you know, whether or not I'm on the next budget committee next year and going forward, I think that just as previous boards have been very careful with money, I think that we have made certain decisions as a budget committee in the last year or two about certain things that we think are extremely important. So I don't envy your job and I don't envy the board's job. But I just want to kind of thank Alicia for what she said. I know her experience, I think she's probably more experienced on either the board or the budget committee than anyone else here, if I'm looking around correctly. And so just thank you for what you said. And, you know, our job today is 1 year, but I think it's smart to kind of keep an eye on it going forward. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? So we come to almost the end of the budget committee process. This next slide is including two motions. One is to approve the appropriations for the general fund and all other funds. The second is to declare the tax rates and debt service levy for the community. So if there's no other discussion, it's up to the committees to make a motion for both of these items, and that will conclude the process.
Yeah, Mike?
Oh, the language just disappeared. Are we moving to approve or are we moving to recommend to the board to approve?
You're moving to recommend the board.
Okay.
Yeah, so after the budget committee, then we will prepare, the staff will prepare resolutions for it to go in front of the board.
And that's for both,
actual adoption.
both the budget and the tax.
Correct. Do you need the language in front of you?
Yeah, the language is probably helpful.
I think it's at the bottom of that presentation that's on your
Yeah,
device.
it's on the screen.
Do you wanna make the motions?
Isn't it the chair's job?
No.
No, I think it's your job as
You can do
the
it.
vice chair.
Usually the chair doesn't do.
You go.
But if you don't wanna do it, Judy wants to.
No, you, Dakota, you do
You
it.
should do it.
Just change it to, instead of I move to approve the budget, change it to.
I move to recommend the budget total for all funds, including the general fund total of $296,486,000, and other funds total of $352,475,
$693.
$693. Pardon me.
That's great. I'll second. But I used to have to write those out, but.
I'm gonna vomit.
No. Wait, vote first.
Oh, yeah, and then you can.
Very
Is
practical.
there any discussion on the motion?
Other than you did a great job. I can't read those.
Thank you, Alicia, that means that.
Yeah. It's tough.
Right, so we'll put that to vote though. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
I
I can't see
Aye.
the folks on the screen there now.
Josh and
Yeah.
Eric, Michelle.
I see Erica.
Is Michelle still there? Josh has his hand raised.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Michelle as well. Great, thank you very much. All those opposed? So that motion passes unanimously. Dakota, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I
You move to recommend.
I move to tax rates and debt service levy for the general fund tax rate of $4.74. That sounds right. Per 1,000 assessed valuation of the district, and for the local option levy tax rate of $1.50 per thousand of assessed valuation of the district, and for debt service fund tax levy of $41,731,950.
I'll second.
Impressive.
Wait,
Any discussion?
You got it.
You did, awesome. Any
Just to be
discussion?
clear,
Yeah.
this is a roll, we're just rolling it over, there's no increase, for the new levy. Sorry. Okay, thanks.
Any other discussion?
One quick question to follow up on Eric. When does the current levy expire again? Is it 2025 or 5, right?
Aye.
So
2020, our levies are on a 5-year cycle, and so they always come up on the 5 and the 0.
So the thinking is the vote, if we were to, and this is not for tonight, but for discussion around the idea of a levy, next year there'll be a discussion about getting it on a ballot because it ends the year after that. Is that how kind of the process works? I see Maya nodding her head for sure, so I'll take that as a yes. Thank you. Okay. But no other discussion for me on this. This looks good.
Any other discussion items? We'll go to the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
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 All those opposed, please do the same. And those digital hands. That's the levy unanimously as well. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for staff's time throughout the process as well. We really appreciate it. Yeah, next on the agenda, yes, Judy.
I just wanted to thank Matt and your team, both of you guys, and Kalina, whoever worked on this. I think the presentation was really clear, and I really appreciate the effort you put in. So, thanks.
I'll second that.
We all approve that. Erica? Oh,
Yeah, I just want to say I realize so much goes into the preparation for these meetings, you know, between staff setting up the links so that we can get on the Zoom meeting to all of the data and the information. And I, you know, for all the people behind the scenes that we don't know how much work you're doing, thank you. We genuinely appreciate how much goes into this and how much you're able to get for us. And often you're able to get it to us in a week or two at most. So genuinely, thank you so much.
And we're sort of rolling right into our budget committee wrap up with any other comments folks would like to have. So if you would like to speak or make any comments, please feel free to do so. I'll add to that commentary real quick. It's like you guys did an amazing job despite our efforts to slow things down and to knock things up. Thank you. Do you have a comment, Matt?
I just wanted to also let you know, we will still send out some additional information for the questions that came up tonight. So I will follow up this week with that information.
Thank you. Other comments from the committee members?
Sorry for being tardy, there was traffic in Bend. I was driving home from Idaho today, so glad I made it to my last budget committee after 16 years. This fun opportunity to hear Dakota come up with numbers and work. That is a tough thing.
I'm being personally victimized right now.
No, I'm being in awe. It was great. Thank you very much. Thanks for the 16 years. This
Thank you
is
for everything you've
17th
done
year
for
of
the district.
Thank you.
Alicia.
Yeah, thank you for your service.
This is John. I just want to, if I may, I want to thank Gary and Dakota. I've been chair 3 times. I've been vice chair a couple of times before that. I was chair during difficult times. When COVID hit and the year after, that was not fun. We didn't have much to talk about really. It was like there's no money, then suddenly there's a ton of money, but no one was in school. It was just crazy. And then last year too. And I just have to say, Gary, you did a great job this year, keeping us all in line, letting people speak and having everyone be heard. And that's the most important thing. We may disagree on some stuff, and that's okay. That's what it's about. But and Dakota, your first run as vice chair, but it's been good. So I just want to thank the two of you for your leadership on our committee.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Appreciate those comments. Yeah, man.
I appreciate everything that everybody said and also want to echo it, but I'm gonna just specifically point out my appreciation for all the follow-up that you did for the number of questions. I don't think a single question got dropped or left behind, and you know, on top of it, you made it understandable, which is extra helpful. But I really appreciate your follow-through. That was extremely helpful with this process, and to get it ahead of time too, so we didn't have to process it in a moment. So thank you. And thank all the other people that people already thanked.
Good job.
Just one more thing, and also the anticipation, knowing that these are gonna be some questions that are gonna come up, and there they were, right? Or put in a way that we could understand, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Alicia's ready.
I was just going to comment on how dressed up they looked, but I was so professional.
And I'll just add to appreciations of staff. Lisa, thank you for helping prepare me for these meetings too, and all the work that you do for the board, support everybody here, so thank you. Any last comments that folks have?
Another round of thanks to Alicia.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia.
It's a lot of years.
It's been a pleasure.
And I also, just as a reminder, we do have an election going on, so please get votes in by next week. I think the 16th is the deadline to get those in. Thanks to all those who have served and who are running and putting their necks out there in service to the community. So thank you for that. And I think with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you for your service, everybody, this year, both staff as well as the volunteers and committee and board members. We look forward to seeing you again soon. We'll wrap it up at 7:15. Have a good night.